Ella. Northampton, June 3, 2008. Beach Boys tunes streaming through their open windows. University students drove past, their faces sporting early summer tans. Ella watched, numb to their happiness, as her mind reverted to the events of the past few days. First she had found Spirit dead in the kitchen, and although she told herself many times to be ready for this moment, she was seized by not only a profound grief but also a sense of vulnerability and loneliness, as if losing her dog had the effect of throwing her out into the world all by herself. Then she found out that Orly was suffering from bulimia and that almost everyone in her class knew about it. This brought a wave of guilt to Ella, leading her to have doubts about her relationship with her younger daughter and to question her record as a mother. Guilt was not a new element in Ella's repertoire of feelings, but this loss of confidence in her mothering was. During this time Ella started exchanging multiple emails with Aziz Zahara every day. 2, 3, sometimes up to 5. She wrote to him about everything, and, to her surprise, he was always prompt to respond. How he could find the time or even an internet connection to check his emails while traveling in remote places was beyond Ella. But it didn't take her long to become addicted to his words. Soon she was checking her email at every opportunity, first thing in the morning and then again after breakfast, when she came back from her morning walk and while she was making lunch, before she went out to run errands and even during them, by stopping at internet cafes. While she was watching her favorite TV shows, chopping tomatoes at the Fusion Cooking Club, talking on the phone with her friends, or listening to her twins rant about school and homework, she kept her laptop on and her mailbox open. When there were no new messages from Aziz, she reread the old ones. And every time she received a new message from him, she couldn't help breaking into a smile, half gleeful, half embarrassed by what was taking place. For something was taking place. Soon exchanging emails with Aziz made Ella feel that she was somehow breaking away from her staid and tranquil life. From a woman with lots of dull grays and browns on her life's canvas, she was turning into a woman with a secret color, a bright, tantalizing red. And she loved it. Aziz was no man for small pleasantries. To him, people who had not made their heart their primary guide to life, who could not open up to love and follow its path the way a sunflower follows the sun, were not really alive. Ella wondered if this might put her on his list of inanimate objects. Aziz didn't write about the weather or the latest movie he had seen. He wrote about other things, deeper things, like life and death, and above all love. Ella was not used to expressing her feelings on such issues, especially to a stranger, but perhaps it took a stranger to make a woman like her speak her mind. If there was a trace of flirtation in their exchange, Ella thought, it was an innocent one that might do them both good. They could flirt with each other, positioning themselves in distant corners within the infinite maze of cyberspace. Thanks to this exchange, she hoped to regain a portion of the sense of worth she had lost during her marriage. Aziz was that rare type of man a woman could love without losing her self-respect. And perhaps he, too, could find something pleasing in being the center of attention of a middle-aged American woman. Cyberspace both magnified and mellowed offline behaviors, providing an opportunity to flirt without guilt which she didn't want because she already had too much, and an adventure without risks which she did want because she never had any. It was like nibbling on forbidden fruit without having to worry about the extra calories. There were no consequences. So maybe it was blasphemy for a married woman with children to write intimate emails to a stranger, but given the platonic nature of their relationship, Ella deduced, it was sweet blasphemy. Ella. Northampton, June 5, 2008. Beloved Aziz, in one of your earlier emails, you said the idea that we could control the course of our lives through rational choices was as absurd as a fish trying to control the ocean in which it swam. I thought about your next sentence a lot. the idea of a knowing self has generated not only false expectations but also disappointments in places where life does not match our expectations. And now it's time for me to confess, I'm a bit of a control freak myself. At least that's what people who know me best will tell you. Until recently I was a very strict mom. I had a lot of rules, and believe me, they're not as nice as your Sufi rules. And there was no bargaining with me. Once my eldest daughter accused me of adopting the strategy of a gorilla. She said I dug into their lives, and from my trench I tried to capture every errant thought or desire that they might have. Remember the song K Sira? Sira? Well, I guess it has never been my song. What will be has never sat right with me. I just can't go with the flow. I know you're a religious person, but I'm not. Though as a family we celebrate the Sabbath every so often, personally I don't even remember the last time I prayed. Oops, I do now. In my kitchen just 2 days ago, but that doesn't count, because it was more like complaining to a higher self. There was a time back in college when I got hooked on Eastern spirituality and did some reading on Buddhism and Taoism. I had even made plans with an eccentric girlfriend to spend a month at an ashram in India, but that phase of my life didn't last long. As inviting as the mystic teachings were, I thought they were too compliant and inapplicable to modern life. Since then I haven't changed my mind. I hope my aversion to religion won't offend you. Please see it as a confession long overdue from someone who cares about you. Warmly, Ella. Dear Gorilla Ella, your email found me as I was getting ready to leave Amsterdam for Malawi. I have been assigned to take pictures of the people in a village where AIDS is rampant and most children are orphans. Now, if everything goes well, I'll be back in 4 days. Can I hope so? Yes. Can I control it? No. All I can do is take my laptop with me, try to find a good internet connection, and hope that I will live another day. The rest is not in my hands. And this is what the Sufis call the fifth element, the void. The inexplicable and uncontrollable divine element that we as human beings cannot comprehend and yet should always be aware of. I don't believe in inaction, if by that you mean doing nothing at all and showing no deep interest in life. But I do believe in respecting the fifth element. I believe we each make a covenant with God. I know that I did. When I became a Sufi, I promised God to do my part to the best of my ability and leave the rest to Him and Him only. I accepted the fact that there are things beyond my limits. I can see only some parts, like floating fragments from a movie, but the bigger scheme is beyond my comprehension. Now, you think I am a religious man. But I am not. I am spiritual, which is different. Religiosity and spirituality are not the same thing, and I believe that the gap between the two has never been greater than it is today. When I look at the world, I see a deepening quandary. On the one hand, we believe in the freedom and power of the individual regardless of God, government, or society. In many ways human beings are becoming more self-centered and the world is becoming more materialistic. On the other hand, humanity as a whole is becoming more spiritual. After relying on reason for so long, we seem to have reached a point where we acknowledge the limits of the mind. Today, just as in medieval times, there is an explosion of interest in spirituality. More and more people in the West are trying to carve out a space for spirituality in the midst of their busy lives. But though they intend well, their methods are often inadequate. Spirituality is not yet another dressing for the same old dish. It is not something we can add to our life without making major changes there. I know you like to cook. Did you know that Shams says the world is a huge cauldron and something big is cooking in it, we don't know what yet. Everything we do, feel, or think is an ingredient in that mixture. We need to ask ourselves what we are adding to the cauldron. Are we adding resentments, animosities, anger, and violence, or are we adding love and harmony? How about you, dear Ella? What ingredients do you think you are putting in the collective stew of humanity? Whenever I think about you, the ingredient I add is a big smile. With love, Aziz. Part 3. Wind. The things that shift, evolve, and challenge the zealot. Kanya, Octob er 19, 1244. Below my open window, dogs were barking and growling. I propped myself up in bed, suspecting they must have noticed a robber trying to break into a house, or some dirty drunk passing by. Decent people cannot sleep in peace anymore. There is debauchery and lechery everywhere. It wasn't always like this. This town was a safer place until a few years ago. Moral corruption is no different from a ghastly disease that comes without warning and spreads fast, infecting the rich and the poor, the old and the young alike. Such is the state of our town today. If it weren't for my position at the madrasa, I would hardly leave my house. Thank God there are people who put the interests of the community before their own and work day and night to enforce order. People like my young nephew, Baibars. My wife and I are proud of him. It is comforting to know that at this late hour, when villains, criminals, and drunks go on a rampage, Baibars and his fellow security guards patrol the town to protect us. Upon my brother's early death, I became the primary guardian for Baibars. Young, adamant, he started working as a security guard 6 months ago. Gossip mongers claimed that it was thanks to my position as a madrasa teacher that he was able to get the job. Nonsense. Baibars is strong and brave enough to qualify for the job. He would also have made an excellent soldier. He wanted to go to Jerusalem to fight against the Crusaders, but my wife and I thought it was time for him to settle down and start a family. We need you here, son, I said. There is so much to fight against here, too. Indeed there was. Just this morning I told my wife we were living in difficult times. It is no coincidence that every day we hear of a new tragedy. If the Mongols have been this victorious, if the Christians could succeed in furthering their cause, if town after town, village after village is sacked by the enemies of Islam, it is because of the people who are Muslims in name only. When people lose hold of the rope of God, they are bound to go astray. The Mongols were sent as a punishment for our sins. If not the Mongols, it would have been an earthquake, a famine, or a flood. How many more calamities do we have to experience for the sinners in this town to get the message and repent their ways? Next I fear stones will rain down from above. One day soon we might all be wiped out, walking in the footsteps of the residents of Sodom and Gomorrah. And these Sufis, they are such a bad influence. How dare they call themselves Muslims when they say things no Muslim should even think of? It boils my blood to hear them utter the name of the Prophet, peace be upon him, to promote their silly views. They claim that following a war campaign, the Prophet Muhammad had announced that his people were henceforth abandoning the small jihad for the greater jihad, the struggle against one's own ego. Sufis argue that ever since then the ego is the only adversary a Muslim should be warring against. Sounds nice, but how is that going to help to fight the enemies of Islam, I wonder? The Sufis go as far as claiming that the Sharia is merely a stage on the way. What stage, I say? What are they speaking of? As if that weren't alarming enough, they argue that an enlightened person cannot be bound by the rules of early stages. And since they like to think of themselves as having already reached a supreme level, they use this as a poor excuse to disregard the rules of the Sharia. Drinking, dancing, music, poetry, and painting seem more vital to them than religious duties. They keep preaching that since there is no hierarchy in Islam, everyone is entitled to his own personal quest for God. It all sounds inoffensive and harmless, but after one wades through the boring verbosity, one discovers that there is a sinister side to their message. that there is no need to pay attention to religious authorities. As far as the Sufis are concerned, the Holy Quran is replete with obscure symbols and layered allusions, each of which ought to be interpreted in a mystic way. So they examine how every word vibrates to a number, study the hidden meaning of numbers, and look out for veiled references in the text, doing everything in their power to avoid reading God's message plain and clear. Some Sufis even say that human beings are the speaking Quran. If this isn't sheer blasphemy, I don't know what is. Then there are the wandering dervishes, another troubled category of misfits. Calendaris, Hateris, Camius, they're known under all sorts of names. I'd say they are the worst. What good could come out of a man who cannot settle down? If a man has no sense of belonging, he can drift in every direction, like a dry leaf in the wind. The perfect victim for shaitan. Philosophers are no better than the Sufis. They ruminate and ruminate as if their limited minds could grasp the incomprehensibility of the universe. There is a story that is indicative of the conspiracy between the philosophers and the Sufis. A philosopher met a dervish one day, and they instantly hit it off. The two talked for days on end, completing each other's sentences. Finally, when they parted company, the philosopher reported of the conversation, "All that I know, he sees." Next the Sufi gave his account, "All that I see, he knows." So the Sufi thinks he sees, and the philosopher thinks he knows. In my opinion, they see nothing and know nothing. Don't they realize that as simple, limited, and ultimately mortal human beings, we are not expected to know more than we should? The most a human being is capable of attaining is a mere smattering of information about the Almighty. That's all. Our task is not to interpret God's teachings but to obey them. When Baibars comes home, we will talk about these matters. It has become a habit, our small ritual. Every night after his shift, he eats the soup and flatbread that my wife serves him, and we engage in conversation about the state of things. It pleases me to see what a good appetite he has. He needs to be strong. A young, principled guy like him has much work to do in this ungodly town. Shams. Konya, Octob ER 30, 1244. Before I met Rumi, just one night prior, I sat on my balcony at the Inn of Sugar Vendors. My heart rejoiced at the magnificence of the universe God had created in His image, so that everywhere we turned, we could both seek and find Him. And yet human beings rarely did that. I recalled the individuals I had met: the beggar, the prostitute, and the drunk. Ordinary people who suffered from a common malady, separation from the One. These were the kind of people that the scholars failed to see while sitting in their ivory towers. I wondered if Rumi was any different. If not, I made a note to myself that I should be a conduit between him and the underbelly of society. The town had finally gone to sleep. It was that time of night when even the nocturnal animals are reluctant to disturb the reigning peace. It always made me both immensely sad and elated to listen to a town sleep, wondering what sorts of stories were being lived behind closed doors, what sorts of stories I could have lived had I chosen another path. But I hadn't made any choice. If anything, the path had chosen me. I remembered a tale. A wandering dervish arrived in a town where the natives didn't trust strangers. "Go away!" they shouted at him. "No one knows you here." The dervish calmly responded, "Yes, but I know myself, and believe me, it would have been much worse if it were the other way round. As long as I knew myself, I would be all right. Whosoever knows himself, knows the One." The moon showered me with its warm glow. A light rain, as delicate as a silk scarf, began to fall on the town. I thanked God for this blessed moment and left myself in His hands. The fragility and brevity of life struck me once again, and I recalled another rule: life is a temporary loan, and this world is nothing but a sketchy imitation of reality. Only children would mistake a toy for the real thing. And yet human beings either become infatuated with the toy or disrespectfully break it and throw it aside. In this life, stay away from all kinds of extremities, for they will destroy your inner balance. Sufis do not go to extremes. A Sufi always remains mild and moderate. Tomorrow morning I will go to the big mosque and listen to Rumi. He can be as great a preacher as everyone says, but in the end the breadth and scope of every speaker are determined by those of his audience. Rumi's words might be like a wild garden, full of teasels, herbs, spruces, and shrubs, but it is always up to the visitor to pick his fancy. While pretty flowers are instantly plucked, few people pay attention to plants with thorns and prickles. But the truth is, great medicines are often made from these. Isn't it the same with the garden of love? How can love be worthy of its name if one selects solely the pretty things and leaves out the hardships? It is easy to enjoy the good and dislike the bad. Anybody can do that. The real challenge is to love the good and the bad together, not because you need to take the rough with the smooth, but because you need to go beyond such descriptions and accept love in its entirety. There is only one more day before I meet my companion. I cannot sleep. Oh, Rumi, the king of the realm of words and meanings. Will you know me when you see me, Rumi? Konya, October 31, 1244. Blessed is this day, for I have met Shams of Tabriz. On this last day of October, the air has a new chill and the winds blow stronger, announcing the departure of autumn. This afternoon the mosque was packed, as usual. While preaching to large crowds, I always take care to neither forget nor remember my audience. And there is only one way of doing this, to imagine the crowd as one single person. Hundreds of people listen to me every week, but I always talk to one person alone, the one who hears my words echo in his heart and who knows me like no other. When I walked out of the mosque afterward, I found my horse readied for me. The animal's mane had been braided with strands of gold and tiny silver bells. I enjoyed listening to the tinkling of the bells at every step, but with so many people blocking the way it was impossible to proceed very fast. In a measured pace, we passed by shabby stores and houses with thatched roofs. The calls of the petitioners mingled with the cries of children and the shouts of beggars eager to earn a few coins. Most of these people wanted me to pray for them, some simply wished to walk close to me. But there were others who had come with bigger expectations, asking me to heal them of a terminal illness or an evil spell. These were the ones who worried me. How could they not see that, neither a prophet nor a sage, I was incapable of performing miracles? As we turned a corner and approached the inn of sugar vendors, I noticed a wandering dervish push his way through the crowd, strutting directly toward me and regarding me with piercing eyes. His movements were deft and focused, and he exuded an aura of self-sufficient competence. He had no hair, no beard, no eyebrows. And though his face was as open as a man's face could ever be, his expression was inscrutable. But it wasn't his appearance that intrigued me. Over the years I had seen wandering dervishes of all sorts pass through Konya in their quest for God. With striking tattoos, multiple earrings and nose rings, most of these people enjoyed having unruly written all over them. They either wore their hair very long or shaved it off completely. Some calendaris even had their tongues and nipples pierced. So when I saw the dervish for the first time, it wasn't his outer shell that startled me. It was, I dare to say, his gaze. His black eyes blazing at me sharper than daggers, he stood in the middle of the street and raised his arms high and wide, as if he wanted to halt not only the procession but also the flow of time. I felt a jolt run through my body, like a sudden intuition. My horse got nervous and started to snort loudly, jerking its head up and down. I tried to calm it, but it got so skittish that I, too, felt nervous. Before my eyes the dervish approached my horse, which was shying and dancing about, and whispered something inaudible to it. The animal started to breathe heavily, but when the dervish waved his hand in a final gesture, it instantly quieted down. A wave of excitement rippled through the crowd, and I heard someone mutter, "That's black magic." Oblivious to his surroundings, the dervish eyed me curiously. "O great scholar of East and West, I have heard so much about you. I came here today to ask you a question, if I may." "Go ahead," I said under my breath. "Well, you need to get down from your horse first and be on the same level with me." I was so stunned to hear this that I couldn't speak for a moment. The people around me seemed equally taken aback. No one had ever dared to address me like this before. I felt my face burn and my stomach turn with irritation, but I managed to control my ego and dismounted me horse. The dervish had already turned his back and was walking away. "Hey, wait, please!" I yelled as I caught up with him. "I want to hear your question." He stopped and turned around, smiling at me for the first time. "All right, do tell me, please, which of the two is greater, do you think, the Prophet Muhammad or the Sufi Bistami?" "What kind of a question is that?" I said. "How can you compare our venerated Prophet, may peace be upon him, the last in the line of prophets, with an infamous mystic?" A curious crowd had gathered around us, but the dervish didn't seem to mind the audience. Still studying my face carefully, he insisted, "Please think about it. Didn't the Prophet say, 'Forgive me, God, I couldn't know thee as I should have,' while Bistami pronounced, 'Glory be to me, I carry God inside my cloak'? If one man feels so small in relation to God while another man claims to carry God inside, which of the two is greater?" My heart pulsed in my throat. The question didn't seem so absurd anymore. In fact, it felt as if a veil had been lifted and what awaited me underneath was an intriguing puzzle. A furtive smile, like a passing breeze, crossed the lips of the dervish. Now I knew he was not some crazy lunatic, he was a man with a question I hadn't thought about before. "I see what you are trying to say," I began, not wanting him to hear so much as a quaver in my voice. "I'll compare the two statements and tell you why, even though Bistami's statement sounds higher, it is in fact the other way round." "I am all ears," the dervish said. "You see, God's love is an endless ocean, and human beings strive to get as much water as they can out of it. But at the end of the day, how much water we each get depends on the size of our cups. Some people have barrels, some buckets, while some others have only got bowls." As I spoke, I watched the dervish's expression change from subtle scorn to open acknowledgement and from there into the soft smile of someone recognizing his own thoughts in the words of another. Bistami's container was relatively small, and his thirst was quenched after a mouthful. He was happy in the stage he was at. It was wonderful that he recognized the divine in himself, but even then there still remains a distinction between God and self. Unity is not achieved. As for the Prophet, he was the elect of God and had a much bigger cup to fill. This is why God asked him in the Quran, "Have we not opened up your heart?" His heart thus widened, his cup immense, it was thirst upon thirst for him. No wonder he said, "We do not know you as we should," although he certainly knew him as no other did. Breaking into a good-natured grin, the dervish nodded and thanked me. He then placed his hand on his heart in a gesture of gratitude and stayed like that for a few seconds. When our eyes met again, I noticed that a trace of gentleness had crept into his gaze. I stared past the dervish into the pearl-grey landscape that was typical of our town at this time of the year. A few dry leaves skittered around our feet. The dervish looked at me with renewed interest, and in the dying light of the setting sun, for a split second, I could swear that I saw an amber aura around him. He bowed to me respectfully. And I bowed to him. I don't know how long we stood like that, the sky hanging violet above our heads. After a while the crowd around us began to stir nervously, having watched our exchange with an astonishment that verged on disapproval. They had never seen me bow to anyone before, and the fact that I had done so for a simple wandering Sufi had come as a shock to some people, including my closest disciples. The dervish must have sensed the censure in the air. "I'd better go now and leave you to your admirers," he said, his voice dwindling to a velvety timbre, almost a whisper. "Wait," I objected. "Don't go, please. Stay." I glimpsed a trace of thoughtfulness in his face, a wistful pucker of the lips, as if he wanted to say more but simply couldn't or wouldn't. And in that moment, in that pause, I heard the question he hadn't asked me. "And how about you, great preacher, tell me, how big is your cup?" Then there was nothing else to say. We ran out of words. I took a step toward the dervish, getting so close I could see the flecks of gold in his black eyes. Suddenly I was overcome with a strange feeling, as if I had lived this moment before. Not once, but more than a dozen times. I started to remember bits and pieces. A tall, slender man with a veil on his face, his fingers aflame. And then I knew. The dervish who stood across from me was no other than the man I had been seeing in my dreams. I knew that I had found my companion. But instead of feeling ecstatic with joy, as I always thought I would be, I was seized by cold dread. Ella. Northampton, June 8, 2008. Beleaguered by questions and lacking answers, Ella found that there were many things that surprised her about her correspondence with Aziz, particularly the fact that it was happening. The two of them were so different in every respect that she wondered what they could possibly have in common to email each other about so frequently. Aziz was like a jigsaw puzzle she aimed to complete piece by piece. With every new email from him, another piece of that puzzle fell into place. Ella had yet to see the entire picture, but by now she had discovered a few things about the man she'd been corresponding with. She had learned from his blog that Aziz was a professional photographer and an avid globetrotter who found navigating his way through the farthest corners of the world as natural and easy as taking a stroll around the neighborhood park. A relentless nomad at heart, he had been everywhere, equally at home in Siberia, Shanghai, Calcutta, and Casablanca. Traveling with only a backpack and a reed flute, he had made friends in places Ella couldn't even find on the map. Uncompromising border guards, the impossibility of getting a visa from hostile governments, waterborne parasitic diseases, intestinal disorders due to contaminated food, the danger of being mugged, clashes between government troops and rebels. Nothing could hold him back from traveling east and west, north and south. Ella thought Aziz was a gushing waterfall. Where she feared to step, he searched full blast. Where she hesitated and worried before acting, he acted first and worried later, if he ever worried at all. He had an animated personality, too much idealism and passion for one body. He wore many hats and he wore them well. Ella saw herself as a liberal, opinionated Democrat, a non-practicing Jew, and an aspiring vegetarian who was determined to cut all sorts of meat from her meals one day. She separated issues into clear-cut categories, organizing her world pretty much as she organized her house, neat and tidy. Her mind operated with two mutually exclusive and equally lengthy lists, the things she liked versus the things she hated. Though she was by no means an atheist and enjoyed performing a few rituals every now and then, Ella believed that the major problem consuming the world today, just as in the past, was religion. With their unparalleled arrogance and self-proclaimed belief in the supremacy of their ways, religious people got on her nerves. Fanatics of all religions were bad and unbearable, but deep inside she thought that fanatics of Islam were the worst. Aziz, however, was a spiritual man who took matters of religion and faith seriously, stayed away from all contemporary politics, and didn't he hate anything or anyone. A die-hard meat eater, he said he would never refuse a plate of well-cooked shish kebab. He had converted to Islam from atheism in the mid-1970s, as he jokingly put it, sometime after Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and before Cat Stevens. Ever since then he had shared bread with hundreds of mystics from every country and religion, and he declared them brothers and sisters along the path. A committed pacifist with strong humanitarian views, Aziz believed that all religious wars were in essence a linguistic problem. Language, he said, did more to hide than reveal the truth, and as a result people constantly misunderstood and misjudged one another. In a world beset with mistranslations, there was no use in being resolute about any topic, because it might as well be that even our strongest convictions were caused by a simple misunderstanding. In general, one shouldn't be too rigid about anything because to live meant to constantly shift colors. Aziz and Ella lived in different time zones. Literally and metaphorically. For her, time primarily meant the future. She spent a considerable part of her days obsessing over plans for the next year, the next month, the next day, or even the next minute. Even for things as trivial as shopping or replacing a broken chair, Ella planned every detail in advance and went around with meticulous schedules and to-do lists in her bag. For Aziz, on the other hand, time centered on this very moment, and anything other than now was an illusion. For the same reason, he believed that love had nothing to do with plans for tomorrow or memories of yesterday. Love could only be here and now. One of his earlier emails to her had ended with this note, "I am a Sufi, the child of the present moment." What a bizarre thing to say, Ella wrote him back, to a woman who has always put too much thought into the past and even more thought into the future but somehow never even touched the present moment. Aladdin. Konya, December 16, 1244. By the fates I wasn't there when the dervish crossed my father's path. I had gone deer hunting with several friends and came back only the next day. By then my father's encounter with Shams of Tabriz was the talk of the town. Who was this dervish, people gossiped, and how come an erudite man like Rumi had taken him seriously, to the point of bowing down to him ever since I was a boy. I had watched people kneel in front of my father and had never imagined that it could be any other way, that is, unless the other person was a king or a grand vizier. So I refused to believe half the things I heard and didn't let the gossip get under my skin, until I arrived home and Kara, my stepmother, who never lies and never exaggerates, confirmed the whole story. Yes, it was true, a wandering dervish named Shams of Tabriz had challenged my father in public, and, what's more, he was now staying in our house. Who was this stranger who had plummeted into our lives like a mysterious rock hurled from the sky? Eager to see him with my own eyes, I asked Kara, "So where is this man?" "Be quiet," Kara whispered, a little nervously. "Your father and the dervish are in the library." We could hear the far hum of their voices, though it was impossible to make out what they were talking about. I headed in that direction, but Kara stopped me. "I am afraid you will have to wait." They asked not to be disturbed. For the whole day, they didn't come out of the library. Neither the next day nor the one following. What could they possibly be talking about? What could someone like my father and a simple dervish have in common? A week passed, then another. Every morning Kara prepared breakfast and left it on a tray in front of their door. No matter what delicacies she prepared for them, they refused it all, content with only a slice of bread in the morning and a glass of goat's milk in the evening. Perturbed, jittery, I was grabbed by an ill mood during this period. At various hours throughout the day, I tried every hole and crack in the door to peep inside the library. Never minding what would happen if they suddenly opened the door and found me eavesdropping there, I spent a lot of time hunched over, trying to comprehend what they were talking about. But all I could hear was a low murmuring. I couldn't see much either. The room was shadowy, on account of the curtains being half closed. Without much to see or hear, I allowed my mind busily to fill in the silences, fabricating the conversations they must be having. Once Kara found me with my ear to the door, but she didn't say anything. By this time she was more desperate than I to learn what was going on. Women can't help their curiosity, it is in their nature. But it was a different story when my brother, Sultan Walid, caught me eavesdropping. He gave me a burning look, his face turning sour. "You have no right to spy on other people, especially not on your father," he reprimanded. I shrugged. "Honestly, brother, doesn't it bother you that our father spends his time with a stranger? It has been more than a month now. Father has brushed his family aside. Doesn't that upset you?" "Our father hasn't brushed anyone aside," my brother said. "He found a very good friend in Shams of Tabriz. Instead of nagging and complaining like a toddler, you should be happy for our father. If you truly love him, that is." That was the sort of thing only my brother could say. I was used to his peculiarities, so I did not take umbrage at his scathing remarks. Always the nice boy, he was the darling of the family and the neighborhood, my father's favorite son. Exactly 40 days after my father and the dervish had cloistered themselves in the library, something strange happened. I was crouched at the door again, eavesdropping on a thicker silence than usual, when all of a sudden I heard the dervish speak up. "It has been 40 days since we retreated here. Every day we discussed another of the 40 rules of the religion of love. Now that we are done, I think we'd better go out. Your absence might have upset your family." My father objected. "Don't worry. My wife and sons are mature enough to understand that I might need to spend some time away from them." "Well, I don't know anything about your wife, but your two boys are as different as night and day," Shams responded. "The older one walks in your footsteps, but the younger one, I am afraid, marches to a different drummer altogether. His heart is darkened with resentment and envy." My cheeks burned with anger. How could he say such awful things about me when we hadn't even met? "He thinks I don't know him, but I do," said the dervish a little while later. While he was crouching, with his ear to the door, watching me through peepholes, I was watching him, too. I felt a sudden chill pass across me as every hair on my arm stood on end. Without giving it another thought, I thrust the door open and stomped into the room. My father's eyes widened with incomprehension, but it didn't take long for his shock to be replaced by anger. "Aladdin, have you lost your mind? How dare you disturb us like this?" my father thundered. Ignoring that question, I pointed at Shams and exclaimed, "Why don't you first ask him how he dares to talk about me like that?" My father didn't say a word. He just looked at me and drew in a deep breath, as if my presence were a heavy burden on his shoulders. "Please, father, Karam misses you. And so do your students. How can you turn your back on all your loved ones for a lousy dervish?" As soon as those words came out of my mouth, I regretted them, but it was too late. My father stared at me with disappointment in his eyes. I had never seen him like this before. "Aladdin, do yourself a favor. Get out of here this minute," my father said. "Go into a quiet place and think about what you did. Do not talk to me until you have looked inside and recognized your mistake." "But, father, just get out," my father repeated, turning away from me. With a sinking heart, I left the room, my palms wet, my knees trembling. At that moment it dawned upon me that in some incomprehensible way our lives had changed, and nothing would be the same again. Since the death of my mother 8 years ago, this was the second time I had felt abandoned by a parent. Rumi. Kanya, December 18, 1244. Basmala, the hidden face of God. Open my mind so I may see the truth. When Shams of Tabriz asked me that question about the Prophet Muhammad and the Sufi Bistami, I felt as though we were the only two people left on the face of the earth. In front of us extended the 7 stages on the path to truth, 7 maqamat every ego had to go through in order to attain oneness. The first stage is the depraved nafs, the most primitive and common state of being, when the soul is entrapped in worldly pursuits. Most human beings are stuck there, struggling and suffering in the service of their ego, but always holding others responsible for their continuing unhappiness. If and when a person becomes aware of the ego's abased situation, by starting to work on himself, he can move to the next stage, which in a way is the opposite of the previous one. Instead of blaming other people all the time, the person who has reached this stage blames himself, sometimes to the point of self-effacement. Herein the ego becomes the accusing nafs and thus starts the journey toward inner purification. In the third stage, the person is more mature and the ego has evolved into the inspired nafs. It is only at this level, and not any time before, that one can experience the true meaning of the word surrender and roam the valley of knowledge. Anyone who has made it this far will possess and display patience, perseverance, wisdom, and humility. The world will feel new and full of inspiration. Nevertheless, many of the people who reach the third level feel an urge to dwell here, losing the will or the courage to go further. That is why, as beautiful and blessed as it is, the third stage is a trap for the one who aims higher. Those who manage to go further reach the valley of wisdom and come to know the serene nafs. Here the ego is not what it used to be, having altered into a high level of consciousness. Generosity, gratitude, and an unwavering sense of contentment regardless of the hardships in life are the main characteristics accompanying anyone who has arrived here. B.